I don't care if I have a video. I don't need one.
All right, then let's just go.
Okay, all right. So I came to Austin way back in the last century to go to the university, and have done a lot of work outside since then. I was the director of Wild Basin Park, which is on the west side of Austin, back in the 80s. I have been working with Environmental Survey for, I think we're up to 30 years now. My business partner, Judy Walther, and I started the company. We do habitat restoration, native landscaping. We work for the city of Austin and city of New Braunfels on urban streams and urban riparian areas, created wetlands. Tonight I'm going to talk to you really two slideshows jammed together. One is about harvesting seed and how to use seed in your projects, both commercial seed and harvesting seed. And the second part, then I will talk about what we're doing at the ranch that you're seeing in that picture, which is Spicewood Ranch, about 40 miles west of downtown Austin in the hill country, where we have been doing habitat restoration on Spicewood Ranch for about 30 years now. And so I'll talk about that, and then particularly discuss how we're using seed on that ranch restoration, as well as a general overview of things. I'm going to try to cram that all into 45 minutes so there's questions. So I will watch my time, and I think that means I'm supposed to stop about 5 to 8 or something for questions. So if I'll watch my time, but if I'm talking too long, you're not here to give me the hook, but give me the hook over the internet, and I'll behave. So seed and seed harvesting. Well, first you've got to get the seed, and right there you can see we're mixing some commercial seed. The green is buffalo grass, and there's a bunch of other commercial grasses, and we're mixing it with some wild harvested seed, which our company does. In the good old days, you could basically buy almost nothing of natives. You could buy Cytos grama. Eventually, you could buy buffalo grass, and then seed producers started to produce more, and so you can get a whole lot more than you could decades ago. Still, though, you can't get everything, or you can't get much of a lot of plants that you might want. So we'll talk about using both commercial seed, because if they can combine it in big fields and they can produce it for a lot cheaper than you can buy it on some of the species, but for a lot of species, the commercial people cannot harvest it in any quantity. The little bit they get is extremely expensive, and the supplies are very limited. So if you're going to do much restoration or diverse landscaping around your house, I'm going to be encouraging you to think about harvesting your own seed. So the way we do this is we figure out what area we're going to seed, whether it's a small area of just like a septic field, or even a little tiny place in your front yard that's 10 by 15 feet. You get your seed, or it's 100 acres. You get your seed, you mix it together, all the things that go in the same area. Sometimes you'll have two mixes, one for shade areas and a different mix for sunny areas. And then you divide your seed up into some reasonable quantities, and you divide your area. So that seed, we've divided our areas up into 7 areas. So we don't start at one end and run out of seed before we get to the 5th or 6th area. So we divide our seed up and we throw it out by hand. Now, how do you put seed out? Well, there's several ways. This is a seed drill, a Truax seed drill, and it's made specifically, it was invented about 40 years ago when people in the West were trying to use corn planters and things like that to restore prairie, and they just couldn't get any traditional farm equipment that could handle the fluffy seed and the weird things that they were trying to seed to do prairie restoration. So Jim Truax invented a bunch of these things that go on the seed drill. You can see at the bottom, it has some discs that are going to cut furrows because this is a no-till drill. In other words, you're not going to disc the whole field, but there's that little disc that opens up a furrow, and then you can't see a little tube that drops a seed down, and then there's the next thing towards the back of little presser wheels, which kind of close the seed in that little furrow. But in those 3 boxes, there's 3 boxes because there's different types of seed. If you put some really slick, shiny seed like horse mint, which is a tiny little bead, in with some fluffy seed like little blue stem, all the horse mint will go out in the first tiny bit of your seeding out the bottom, and there won't be any left by the time you get down. So you divide the seed into the different boxes, and some of those boxes have what's called a picker wheel, which is a metal gear with a hook on it that grabs that bulky, fluffy seed that wants to stick together in masses and takes a little piece and drops it down the hole, which goes down into those wheels and down onto the ground. Expensive piece of equipment, but this is really helpful if you're seeding acres and acres and acres. There's the boxes, putting the different seed in the boxes, and there we go around. You can see how there's little furrows, and it's burying those seeds in that furrow. Seed is not supposed to go real deep. It's supposed to go about the thickness of the seed. If you've seen seed, we'll show some pictures later. A lot of those seeds are like a pencil point or less in size, and so that's the depth that you want the seed. That said, you never get all the seed at exactly the right depth. You get it at different depths. Some's going to be at the right depth, some a little bit not, some a little too deep, but with the wind and erosion and things like that, some of the seed should be just fine. Now, here's a little bit more primitive thing before we could see afford that seed drill. We have a guy on a Volkswagen car seat strapped on with a seat belt and a helmet and a dust mask, and he's taking that seed and dribbling it out. And to the right, there's a drag harrow, which is a chain mat weighted down with some very high-tech old tires and rocks. If the ground is wet, you take some of the rocks off so it doesn't get too deep, but if the soil is really hard, you put more rocks on. High-tech. And we're going back and forth across the field. Now, here's what this is what we were doing last week. We took our seed, we divided it into 4 bussing pans, we eyeballed our site, and we're just hand throwing it. What we're doing is, this is about a 1/4 acre, basically like feeding the chickens. What you do with that pan is you take that pan and you eyeball the area that that pan is supposed to cover, and you try to get all the way across that area, only using half the seed in the pan. When you get to the other side, you can say, whoops, I used almost all, and you say, phew, well, at least I got it covered. Or you have some left, you go back, throw it on the areas that maybe didn't get quite as much seed. Then those guys are going to take some rakes, old garden rakes, and just stir it up. Actually, we have a temporary irrigation, so they got it a little bit wet so that the ground could stir up a little bit. Not trying to really bury the seed deep, but just get it right below the surface. Seed soil contact is what you want. So where do you get the seeds? Well, Native American seed is the main supplier of a lot of the diversity that you can get. There are other suppliers. They used to not have too many seeds. They're getting more. Some of the seeds that Native Texas has, you can only get small quantities. You can't buy a pound. You can buy a pound of Floridian horse mint and 50 pounds of little blue stem, but you get that packet of drum and phlox for $6. Well, that's a lot of money, but that's a lot of seed. That's a lot of genetics. But these are the kind of things that you might be able to harvest yourself. And when you start seeing a handful of seed like that, you just collected in 5 minutes, you might say, I just saved $6. So use that seed. I bought the seed last week because I didn't harvest any phlox, and I needed Native American seed, but I didn't buy standing cypress because I had harvested it, and I got a lot more of it a lot cheaper than $6 a pound because I've got a good site for it. There's Indian blanket. On the other hand, that whole pound of Indian blanket costs, seed prices vary, but probably somewhere 20 bucks or something, 25. So depending on how easy it is for the seed harvest to harvest seed, the less expensive it is. The catch on that is the more important the seed is, the more it's a slow growing perennial, the more it is a really interesting plant, probably the less seed is going to be there, and the harder it is going to be harvested, and the harder it is going to be fine. So there's an inverse proportions to how easy and cheap it is to get to how much you really want it. So we harvest our own. This is Virginia Wild Rye. We just cut the seed heads off of some at a place. I have many acres, and we can get as much of this as we want and have time for. But if I threw that out, I've got 20 seeds right in one place. So you want to process it a little bit. You don't need to process it as much as if you were a seed harvester, and you got to store it, and you need to get rid of the bulk, and you need to send it in the mail and all that. But what we want to do is to break that up so each of those individual seeds is separate from the other seeds, so you spread them out. So I'll show you the high-tech equipment that we use for that. There we go. That's a cement mixing pan from Home Depot or Lowe's. That's a cheap shoe. That's a stinky foot. I'm scraping back and forth and breaks that up. We've done everything. We've put a tarp out and driven our tractor back and forth over a big pile of plateau goldeneye to break the seeds head up. The idea is whatever really breaks that up, to get it to spread out is in the least amount of time and effort is the way to get your seed. Sometimes you want to separate it. These are some very expensive seeding filters that I bought at Target for about, one of them was $6. These are desk containers for the office from Target. And then there's some hardware screen, depending on what you're trying to sort out. You don't need to sort out the stems from the small pieces, but sometimes you might want to get rid of some of the bulk. This is a highly sophisticated seed bucket. Basically a 5-gallon bucket with some duct tape with some wire, coat hanger type wire, and you can put that over your belt. Makes it hugely helpful to have 2 hands to harvest seed with. Instead of holding a bag in one hand and trying not to drop it while you harvest the seed with the other hand, 2 hands are much better. This is a tool that I am trying to track down. I took a picture of it in Illinois, the prairie people, when they're clipping stuff off, reaching into a bush to clip off a seed head, that has a little attachment and it grabs onto the stalk. So when you reach way in, you come back with the stalk. It just doesn't fall to the ground. Really neat attachment. I think it's made in Japan, and I'm trying to track down where that comes from. The thing about seed harvesting is it's very peaceful, it's time consuming, and when you do something for an hour or two, you have time to think about, you know, if I had such and such, this would go faster. And you have a lot of time to think about those things while you're seed harvesting. This is a great seed harvesting tool. And if you stay for a little while in the slideshow, you will find out what that's for. It's also an important answer to one of the questions on the quiz for the Water District. All right, so this is something that from the only seed source around you could buy in small packets. This is spiderwort, Tradescantia, and it is it blooms in maybe March into April a little bit, and then it makes these seed heads. And it's fairly easy to just pop these seed heads off, put them in the bucket. There's the bucket. And look at how much seed heads I have. Compare that to a packet of $6 seed. You know, that's probably about 10 or 15 minutes worth of harvesting. Although you can spend an hour or two driving to a place to harvest and find out it's not ready and going back and doing that several times. So when you count how much time it takes you to harvest, don't forget to remember how much time it took you to get the seed or find it when it's ready. Now, there's the actual seed of spiderwort, those little volcanoes. Really neat seed. I didn't realize that for a year or two until I looked closely. Now, that is not a sophisticated hand lens like botanists used to carry around. Us old botanists have learned new tricks. That's my cell phone. And I just zoomed in, and extremely useful. You probably have it in your pocket anyway, so that if you're out harvesting and you get bit by a rattlesnake, you can call the emergency people. But it's a great way to magnify things. You can magnify if you're trying to identify something and you need to find out if there's hairs on the calyx or something like that. Use your cell phone. It's really neat. Here's some of that rye that I showed you that we stomped on with our feet. It is not ready. One of the reasons I know it's not ready is because there's all the pollinanthers, those little yellow anthers sticking out there. It's just starting to pollinate, which means it's not ready. So how do you tell when seed is ready? Let me read my list of a few things that we published about 40 years ago. The seeds are full size, so that means you got to kind of look at them. They're not little weeny things. They've actually filled out. But how do you know when they're full size? Well, you need to have been looking at seed now and then, which is kind of interesting. The seed coats are changing color. They usually start out green or whitish, but as they dry, they get brown, or that's black on this. That's the lyre leaf sage. See how those seeds have turned black? And the stems are dry. If the stems are dry, that means that no moisture or nutrients are going from the roots up to the top of the grass. And so if you cut that off, you're not blocking any nutrients. It's going to dry in your back porch rather than dry on the top of the plant, because either way, no nutrients are going to come. So the seed has all the nutrients it's going to get. And the other way you can tell is if the earliest seeds are dropping. And the way I told with this is some of those seed heads are empty. They've dropped the seed. Now what you'll find on certain plants is the first blooms might have dropped the seeds. The middle blooms have still a lot of seeds, and the very end blooms might not quite be ready. And so that's how you can kind of tell, well, if I get it now, I will miss the first part of the seed, but I'll get the last part. I might destroy the last 5 or 10%, or I could come back in a week, lose the first half of the seed and get the last half. Also, one plant right next to the other one might not be quite at the exact same time schedule. So there we've sorted out that seed. These mints, this lyre leaf sage and the cedar sage and a few other mints, they have four little seeds tucked in those little husks where the flowers come out. I'm not sure how many mints do that or not, but pretty interesting. But that's what you see when you start to look closely. Also, if you squeeze those seeds in your fingernails, you probably can find out that there's some white, kind of milky, sunflower seedy type meal inside. And if so, you know there's really something inside. Sometimes there won't be anything because things got dried out and they don't form seed. For size comparison on that photograph in the top left quadrant, there's a nice little ant to give you perspective on the world. That's how an ant sees those seeds, as something huge to maybe take back to the nest if they're a harvester ant. Now, remember I said that the Gaillardia is really cheap and really easy. Well, some of the things that you can't buy or can buy only in very tiny quantities, it's because they have a different thought process for producing seed and reproducing the species. The annuals are very prolific. They just throw out gazillions of seed, figure out, have 1 million babies, and 1 or 2 will make it, and that's all we need. Some of the long-lived perennial flowers have a totally different strategy. Now, if you know the sunflower family, you know that there's ray flowers, which on this plant are the 8 petally type things with a little style of stigma in the middle that are actually 8 little flowers, and those are the ray flowers. In the middle, there's a whole bunch of little flowers that haven't opened yet, and they're the disc flowers. Now in the Gaillardia, it's the disc flowers, the 50 in the middle, that produce seed. Whereas on the green eyes, which is what this is, the Belandiarii, only the ray flowers form seed. They tend to be larger, and there's 6 or 8. And if you look at that dried seed head, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 black lines in a little brown husk, and that's the seed of that. Now, this green eyes is hard to harvest because one flower will ripen, those seeds will form, and 2 or 3 days later they'll fall. And then another flower ripens. So you just can't go in there and get all the seed, and they fall off very quickly. So what do you do for that? And they're very uncommon. I know of 4 colonies of green eyes in Travis County, my county, 4 wild colonies. I have more now in gardens that I've planted and things like that. So they're uncommon, and they produce small amounts of seed, and the seed comes very slowly and gradually, and you can't get much at one time. Well, here's a great strategy for your backyard. See that wire in the back? That's a tomato cage. And what I've done is I harvested some seed from the roadside. I'm going to talk about the ethics of that. And I grew a plant. The other advantage of these is many of these with larger seeds, I get really good germination success. And that's crucial because it's very helpful to get good germination. I took a couple of those plants, I put it in a tomato cage by my garden near my tomatoes, so it gets watered, and it's 50 feet from my front door. When I go out to compost, I'll go and I'll pick the last week's seed, and I'll get 50, 100, 75 seeds, and then I'll go away for a week, and I'll come back again. And so from that one plant, I got thousands of seed this summer, and I can put it out in my bigger restorations. And it's much easier to harvest than driving over to the one place on the side of the road where it might have been. I went to some place a couple of weeks ago. It was all mowed down by the county roadside people. There was a few little stinkers right on the fence that I got seed from. So what are the ethics? Seed harvesting ethics. Basically, it's a little bit like medicine, do no harm. A little bit more specific than that, you want to only take a small percentage of the seed, which is pretty easy to do. Sometimes it's hard to, like if you go to a green eyes, you're going to get what's there that week, but you didn't get what was there last week. You're not going to get what was there the week before. Try to keep the places where that seed source is alive. I've even walked down the side of the road and spread it a little bit and harvest some, but spread a little bit further down. So the colony has actually been bigger a few years now because it's a little bit further along on the roadside. And one of the other ethics is make sure you use it. If you harvest it, don't just forget about it and leave it. Really get some good plants out of it and make sure that you're helping that species continue. So here's the ethics. This is one of the colonies of green eyes that I knew about in Travis County. This is exactly where those seeds came from, that plant in my garden. It's gone. They widened Highway 71 down by the Bergstrom Airport. There's airport parking. That green eyes colony is gone. And so sometimes when we're doing this, we are, we're paying attention, and we're actually improving the chances for the species in the county as opposed to depleting it. A couple other ways to harvest seed. This is tall drop seed for a big field we're doing. The seed on drop seed is both at the top and the sides. What I've done is I've spread a tarp. You can see it in the background. I'm grabbing that whole plant, I'm cutting it, and I'm throwing it on the tarp, and I've got this big pile of grass, and they all look like they've got a haircut. And I've got many thousands of drop seed on that tarp after about a half hour of seed harvesting. So this is economical. Also, I don't know of anybody at all, seed harvesters in Texas that are selling drop seed for sale. I don't know why, but it's a good early succession prairie plant. Going to railroad right-of-ways for the Delphinium. I went there because there was a pretty big colony, and also the the name escapes me here. It'll come back in a minute to me. The hyacinth, not the water hyacinth. Now, what I said about ethics, that whole field where that housing development was had delphiniums. It's all housing development. There's just a little bit left by the railroad tracks. That's the I'm having a brain stoppage here. I'll think of it in a minute. I didn't write my notes down. But notice what I'm doing. I harvested it, and then I went down the right of way, and I'm spreading some. In other words, I harvested some, but I gave some back. I'll go back, and maybe the colonies will be bigger over the years. If the highway department, I mean, if the railroad people don't destroy it or they take that railroad out. While I was harvesting that, I saw some creek plums. Hey, might as well get some. No, can't get them. Not ripe yet. I'll have to come back. While I was at the creek plums, cecropia moth caterpillar. So when you're doing the seed harvesting, it's really interesting because you're out there and you're staying in one spot longer and you're paying attention and you're looking. I would have never seen that caterpillar if I hadn't been poking around in those creek plums. There is the cocoon of that moth because we've raised them in our house and we've increased them and protected them and also brought some to the wildfire center where they've grown them and protected them and released the cecropia moths. That's what I'm harvesting with the tennis racket. Now I know you say, oh, that could be a rare plant he's got there. Anybody know what that is? I can see all the hands go up. That's giant ragweed. Yes. Not a rare plant. Why am I harvesting giant ragweed? Because I want to grow it. Why would I want to grow it? Well, because we've done some really interesting findings with our ranch project that I'll show you in a minute. There's no giant ragweed except in one teeny little protected place on over 1,000 acres. You know why? The deer are eating it because there's an overpopulation of deer. We have a problem in Austin. All the riparian creeks around the neighborhoods that the city is trying to restore to something more natural get complained because the first thing that comes up is giant ragweed and the neighbors hate it. Why? It's a native plant. Why is it out of balance? No, we don't have any deer. So I'm harvesting seed so that I can test some of these hypotheses and grow some at the ranch, inside and outside exclosures, blah, blah, blah. Good seed. I know that a tennis racket is used by people in parts of the West on thorny, shrubby bushes out in the desert to get seed, spiny bushes, putting a tarp under it and beating it with a tennis racket. Those go for about $2 or $3 at next to New Store or the Salvation Army. Seed harvest, like in the Midwest, they're a little bit further ahead of us. Here's seed harvesters in Illinois. That's a restored prairie in the background. They're using drill harvesters. They're doing 200 or 300 acres a year. They're going to the places where somebody got a teeny bit of seed many years ago, and then they got it where they could get more because they had 100 plants on their restoration rather than 3 plants on a roadside. And now they're harvesting it. And these are all volunteers because they're getting ready to do some big, they're moving cornfields into prairies is what they're doing, which is wonderful. And you know, they're getting seed. And see, it's practical if you think about it the right way, that you can do this. It's good to do together with people. It's good to do by yourself and just pay attention. That seed. Now, how do we use it? I'm going to try to go through this real quick. We have been working for about 30 years on the Spicewood Ranch, typical hill country ranch. Overbrowsed, overgrazed. Probably 100 and 150 years ago, it had a bunch of goats on it, mined the edible browse. Cows ate most of the good grass. They're trying to put it back, very much like the rest of the hill country. That's Chris Hart and his son Will, who are owners of the ranch and sponsoring on doing all this work. This is what it looks like in good weather. So I'm going to go through these pretty quick. These slides, I think, will be in the slideshow, so you'll have a chance to go back and read these more in details. But you know, we have our goals, we have our analysis, we have different plant communities there. And we're trying to figure out what the original vegetation was, because a lot of it's missing. Probably half the species that used to be part of that ranch and most of the hill country are just barely around. There's just a few little places where the deer and the goats couldn't eat them or the cows didn't eat them. So looking for clues as for our restoration. So what are we doing? We're removing cattle so that we can repair the grasslands. We're doing seedings, we're doing controlled burns. We're dealing with plant and animal exotic species. We're reducing the unnatural levels of cedar, but keeping the ones we want. And we're doing some high fencing and some deer reduction. We're playing the roles of the wolves, the mountain lions, and the jaguar that used to eat the deer. We are trying to not only do grasses, which is what a lot of people think of first when they think of restoration, because that's easiest. What's much harder is the forbs, especially the edible forbs that aren't there because the deer have eaten them and are probably going to eat them if you try to put them back unless you do something about it. And the woody species, which are half of them are missing because the goats and the deer have eliminated or greatly reduced them, and we'll keep doing some about that if you try to put them back unless you put them in cages or do something about the deer levels. So plant communities, very briefly, a lot of the hill country, there's just cedar. If you look closely, there's oak trees under it and they're bigger. And if you can mentally subtract the cedar trees, a lot of that was oak savanna. It was maintained through burns, natural fires and fires set by indigenous peoples. And so there was, but there was oaks in it, live oaks, and a savanna is sort of half shade, half light, some variation. There are some remnants of post oak savanna, which in the hill country occur in where there's deeper gravelly soils. And we have a few spots, just a very small percentage of the ranch that are in oaks that we're trying to put back as oak savanna. There's cedar breaks. There was always cedar in the hill country. Otherwise, golden cheek warble couldn't have evolved to be dependent on it. There were midgrass prairies. There was riparian woodlands. There's an alligator creek there with pecan trees and elm trees and so on. There are some limestone cliffs down when it changes geology. And then there's some heavy brush areas that we don't know what the natural equivalent are. Those might be creations of just decades of overgrazing by goats and deer, but we're not sure. Those cliffs, by the way, are refugia for places because there are things that just like those cliffs because that's what they like, but also there were places on the cliffs that the goats couldn't get to, and a few plants would survive on those cliffs, like Bavonia and evergreen sumac, that couldn't survive anyplace else. So getting rid of the cows, the ranch goes all the way to the Colorado River, which is completely unnatural because sometimes that's filled with water and then sometimes it's down, so there's no riparian area that can develop. And in those areas, we have rare plants like the tephrosia, a little legume that's mostly native to sandy areas, but it's native up in the middle of the hill country where you get sands from granite and the sands that have washed down from the granite areas down towards the Highland Lakes. Now, this is what the ranch looks like sometimes, pretty bad looking. This is the same, almost the same place. That's what happens when you get a wet spring. So did we do something miraculous? No. Those are all inedible forbs after good rain. The deer don't eat gaillardia. They don't eat brown-eyed Susan. They don't eat horse mint. They don't eat the leaves of mesquites. They don't eat the prickly pear. So basically, it's pretty, but it's all inedible in terms of browse. So when you see the hill country, you see areas that only have the forbs that are left that the deer wouldn't eat and the shrubs that the deer wouldn't eat. And those would be these guys. I'm not gonna read all these, the sennas and the cactus and the colubrina and the mimosas and the plums and the agaritas and the mesquite and the Juniperus ashii. And then now and then you find a remnant of what there was probably a lot. This is a Mexican plum. And that's a big one. The deer can't, notice there's no leaves below his shoulder height, the deer eating them. It gets these little seedlings you can see on the right, but the deer eat them. Same with the ilex. Oh, here's a Mexican plum on the right. It grew up in the middle of a persimmon, so it escaped the deer and it got to 5 foot high, so it might live. But we use this as a clue to say, there was Mexican plum here, and there's only 1 or 2 left. And we don't do something. When they die of old age, they'll be gone. We need to do something before they die of old age. That's a deciduous yaupon. And look at the browse on the right. The deer are eating all the sprouts that come up on the base. It's trying to live. We get the deer numbers down, it'll spread on its own. Burrow, the post oaks. These spots, there's no young post oaks younger than 50, 60 years. Every single post oak on this whole ranch was older than that. That's about when there was goats and deer, and they've just eliminated reproduction. What do you call that? A dying forest. So we have done some work on the deer, and we have done some exclosures, and we know that that's more than theory, that we really have some success with post oak seedlings. Up on that cliff, there's 3 little green blocks. That's the evergreen sumac. Those are the only places on the ranch that the goats couldn't get them. Over 1,000 acres, and we have 3 or 4 of these evergreen sumac stuffed on the cliff. What that tells us as restorationists is that they belong there. We need to put them back, and we need to figure out how to get the deer populations down enough and get them enough to eat so that we can get them back. Same with the flowers. If you have a brown-eyed Susan, a Mexican hat, and horse mint, and Gaillardia, and Heterotheca, and Gutierreza, that's left because the deer don't eat them. Whereas some of the things that are really edible, this is a mile or 2 away. This is one of the Silphium radulas that's protected by this fence and these rocks so that the county mowers can't mow them. There's Engelmann daisies out here where the deer wouldn't go. As we start improving conditions, it's moving into the ranch. A number of other species I won't go into, and then the grasses, because the grazing has been degraded. So mostly you have woman's love grass and the Klein grass and the KR blue stem, and not much left. So we're trying to put them back. What we've done is, and there's a link to this at the last slide, we'll leave that up on our website. We're ranking all of the not all, but over 100 of the flowers and the shrubs to how edible they are. The ones on this part of the list mean that the deer won't touch them. They could be starving and they still won't eat the agaritas, and they won't eat the brown-eyed Susans and so on. So you can go on our website and look at that. It's basically a menu of what you could guess might grow and what not. If you can find out what the deer are eating and what they're not eating, then you know where you are in relationship to other things that you may or may not be able to put back. So we remove the cattle. For now, we might eventually get them back, but we've got to get cattle love to eat little. If you have little blue stem and KR together, the cattle will eat the little blue stem, not eat the KR, and it'd be virtually impossible to shift from the KR to the little blue. We're doing controlled burns. Notice how a low burn creeps through and will kill the young seedlings. We're doing removal of the junipers. Here's a burn. This is a picture perfect burn. We're at the bottom end of the field lighting our circle. We're coming up closer. We're coming up closer. People have their Nomex yellow safety wear on. We're getting closer. This is one of those classic burns that you almost never see, but that day it just went classic. We've set the head fire. It rushes into the middle and poof, and it's all done. That's probably about a 10-minute sequence. And so we're getting the grasslands back. We're also clipping the juniper, some with an attachment on a bobcat and nippers on the front. We're doing exotic species management like the Wilman's love grass and China berries, hogs, and we're doing some high fencing so that we can control and reduce the deer population. The other thing is we want to get the woodies back. And why are we not removing all the cedar, but just some of it? Because many of the woodies that are missing, like the evergreen sumacs and redbuds, they start under juniper trees. And when those juniper trees are cut or burned, the fire-resistant evergreen sumacs and so on underneath come up. And we learned that at Wild Basin, where there was an old fire, and we were looking at 60 years later, we go to a clump of some really neat plants, and we would see the stump of the old cedar that was right in the middle of that from the fire that we knew happened at Wild Basin about 50, 60 years previous. This is a evergreen sumac in a cage. What we learned is, yes, it will grow there. It's pretty easy. No big issue. All you need to do is protect it from deer. What happened to the seeds? They go out of the cage, and but the ones that fall in the cage start making new evergreen sumac. So not only can we grow it, it will self-reproduce, and the one on the left is protected by those branches. The deer quite can't get it, but the one on the right, the deer stripped all the leaves. So we know that the ranch is not quite ready for these sumacs to come back on their own. We need to both get the deer down and get more for them to eat so that we improve our browse conditions. So there's a little evergreen sumac seedling from seed that we've harvested. We're harvesting all our own seed. Here's a piece of trivia. A 5-gallon bucket of sumac seed is about 60,000 seeds. And on a good day, in about an hour and a half, you can harvest a 55-gallon bucket. Lo and behold, we put one of our post oak areas in some high fence and got the deer out. It was an isolated piece. Bingo. We've got post oak seedlings. That's actually a 4-year-old one. And then we burned half of them. And that's a 4-year-old one with the dead stick to the left was burned in 2011, which was that really bad drought year. And later, after that, they came back. This is a burn tolerant savanna oak species, post oak. Rare plant, Amorpha romeriana. We know of one colony that's within a couple miles of the ranch, the only colony I've seen in my life. We're harvesting some seeds, and now we have in the area where the deer can't get them, some little baby plants. So we have learned that we can grow them, we can pick seed, we can put them under cedar trees where we think they might grow. They will sprout, they will live, even through some droughts without watering. We're going to try to put some outside the exclosure. We suspect that they're going to get eaten, that we're not quite to the place where we can put them back. So that's what we're using that seed for. We're harvesting quite a bit of woodies. We're harvesting Mexican plums right now. We're harvesting Eisenhardia and so on. This is a couple other seed harvests. This is from an old slideshow. We've already covered this. There's those same spiderworts. About 15 minutes later, you can see I filled that bucket up. We're harvesting from that silphium. We're growing some things on the ranch. There's no Maximilian sunflower. Now there are. What we figured out is that there were certain things that wouldn't survive on the ranch when we first started doing this. And these 5 species, the Maximilian sunflower, the standing cypress, the Vigera dentata, the liatris, and the Engelmann daisies. But if we improved conditions a little bit, they would survive. And so that's what we did. We started out with some of these that were close to being able to survive. Once we got the deer numbers improved somewhat, they would survive. But what happened is a multiplier effect, because not only they survive, the deer will eat them and survive on them, and they have more food. So you want less deer, but more browse for them. And so you can improve your ratio for other plants. Let me show you what. There's the standing cypress. There's the plateau goldeneye. There's plateau. There was no plateau goldeneye on the ranch. There's hundreds of thousands of them. We get a big pile of plateau goldeneye in the fall. That's usually about 10 foot by 20 foot by about 5 foot tall of plateau goldeneye tops. We're getting the liatris from the ranch now. Many of these things we've increased on the ranch where we can harvest them. There's the Engelmann daisies that we've put out in that field that you can see where we've been burning, and we can harvest most of our own Engelmann daisy there. It's moving over from the side also. This is an interesting picture. This is Vigera dentata during a couple summers ago when it was really dry. The deer were stressed, Maximilian sunflower. The deer have nibbled on them a whole lot. That's good and bad. They're damaging the plants, but we got a lot of them now, but they're getting some food. And but let me show you that same day, I went to one of our exclosures and I took the picture on the left of the liatris. Drought, but it's doing just fine. The picture on the right, each one of those liatrices, the top have been nibbled off by the deer, and then it comes up as a candelabra. And it's a clue as to what your deer are doing. There's a clue as to what your browse level is. So the browse level here is enough that the deer are eating it, they're using it, but not killing it, which means to me, that's my number 2.5 on a 1 to 5, which doesn't mean anything to you, but it's a good clue. So there's a bunch of forbs then that once we get the basic ones, we get more eat, the deer's less pressure, we can start putting some that are even more edible, like the Simsia calva. We're getting echinaceas, we're getting penstemons, and they're starting to survive outside the exclosure. We grew them first in the exclosure, we can increase the seed, now we're throwing them out in the brave world, and we're finding out that some of them can survive. So that's the process of building, starting to try to put back not only the grasses, but the forbs, the edible forbs, not just the cheap, easy annuals that the deer don't eat, but the really valuable, later successional, uncommon things like the echinaceas and the penstemons and the green eyes. The green eyes can live out there where the deer are now. So we're really making progress and we're improving our browse. And by doing restoration, we're not only doing the grasses, but we're doing the woody plants and we're doing the forbs, and we're nowhere near done yet after 30 years, but we're making progress. And there's no way that we could have done this without doing seed harvesting ourselves. So grasses are easiest and quickest, forbs are harder and longer, and woodies are the hardest and longest. You know, you can plant a woody plant and might not even put out seeds for 10 years. So and we are doing this sequentially. We are putting out things that we could not have done 30 years because over the 30 years, we have changed our site. And so we see this as a sequential restoration and management using adaptive management. A couple years ago, badger showed back up. No one's seen badger out there in memory. If you build it, they'll show up, and restoration takes a long time. So I have rudely exceeded my time a little bit. What do I do? Stop my screen share now? Oh, I know what I want to do. I want to give you that. That's our email, our phone number, and there's the link for that palatability ranking of native species for deer, that 1 to 5 list of 100 species. So back to you all.
Thank you so much, David. We do have a couple of questions, but before we get to those questions, I will ask anybody else to go ahead and, if you've got a question, go ahead and type it into the chat box, and we'll go through them. I did want to say a couple of things first, though. You're my new favorite person because you appreciate giant ragweed, and I also appreciate very much that you spoke about the ethics of seed harvesting. And you know, I was taught by knowledgeable folks, and I hadn't really thought about it before. And I've met many people who have good intentions with collecting seed, and they haven't ever been told about some of the ethics and some of the best practices that are involved with that. So thank you for doing that. And then the last thing I'll say is I saw a presentation you gave years ago on your palatability ranking at a Texas Society for Ecological Restoration presentation. And it was fascinating then, and I still keep up with it. Your information is really helpful. And from one standpoint, from the restoration standpoint, you can look to degraded indicators for degraded systems, these plants that remain that the deer won't eat. But for people like me who live in a suburban area with really high deer populations that impact your yard, your landscaping, those are some of the species that we can put in and actually have some good benefits. So I think that information is amazing. I'm so glad you make it available to everyone. And I would encourage anyone that's watching to go check out that list, because it's really has a lot of great information. So we have a few questions here.
We do update it now and then. As we learn
awesome.
more about those species. Some of them, like we had zero information on the Amorpha. So now we're learning where to rank that, you know, so we do update it now and then. So my point is, Lee, that is maybe you need to go look at it again. Maybe we've updated it from 8 years ago.
Yes, I need to get a new version of it. So we do have a couple questions. Rachel asked early on if the name of the ranch is Spicewood Springs Road, the namesake for the ranch?
No.
Or what?
There's a Spicewood Springs Road in Austin, and that's not it. It's Spicewood Ranch, and it's in Spicewood, Texas. And Spicewood, Texas is a teeny old defunct gas station and 2 churches and an old gas station about a half a mile or a mile off of Highway 71. But now it's mostly a big barbecue place and a big gas station out on Highway 71, probably about 20, 30 miles west of Oak Hill, if you know the west part of Austin.
Okay, thank you. And then Alex asked early on if you are aware of any local sources for native grass plugs, and he specified Cytotes grama, curly mesquite, buffalo grass, and also was curious about any other native grasses that are available from local sources as plugs.
Very, very little. Now, the Wildflower Center will sell some 4-inch containers of them, and they have had to move their sale to a appointment only on weekends starting next weekend in Austin. But those are not, plugs tend to be smaller, cheaper, mass produced, and so on. And so you're going to get a little bit more expensive 4-inch pots money going to a good cause. Sometimes Native American Seed, the company that I mentioned that has good seed, they will sell bare root cuttings of several grasses. Very few, like they often have Eastern Gamma grass and 1 or 2 other things that they will ship you some bare root grasses, but still not plugs. And I don't know of anybody. I suspect if you got into East Texas, there may be some people doing grass plugs for Forest Service type projects, but I don't really know of any offhand. But on the other hand, grasses are fairly easy to grow from seed compared to other things. So, and you could buy like a pound of some of these grasses from someplace like Native American Seed. You can harvest it yourself. It's very easy to go find some Cytotes grama and strip off seed in a minute or 2. Way more than you would want to grow in your backyard in some little trays and flats. But the grasses are for green, not so green thumbers, easier to grow than most anything else.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Fred, and he's wondering who supports this work. Is it the landowners? Are there state resources or other resources that are helping to support this work?
The Spicewood Ranch work is primarily supported by the owner. This is his dedication. He's a conservationist. He's been on the national board of the Audubon Society, and he just sees this as a really important thing to do. He started out just sort of following behind his wife, Kay Hart, who studied restoration at Texas Tech many decades ago. And when she passed about 20 years ago, Chris and their son Will took this on as a family project, and they've grown the ranch. They've added pieces next to it. So it's a very rare place that has gotten bigger rather than smaller. And the land has gotten undivided rather than divided. There is, if you go, and Spicewood Ranch won an award from the Texas Parks and Wildlife about a year and a half, no, about 2 years ago. And if you Google Spicewood Ranch, Texas Parks and Wildlife, yeah, I think you'll come up with 1 or 2 YouTube videos. One is like a 25-minute, and it features about 4 or 5 minutes about the 7 ranches that during that year in different parts of the state won that state award. And so if you really want to know more about Chris, they interview him and they talk about the deer management, and Bill Carr walking around talking about the plants. And so that's another little introduction to the ranch that you could get if you'd like. Also, if you will get in contact with us at that email, our company puts out a little newsletter every 2, 3, maybe 4 times a year. And when we're not all locked down, we'll announce some tours out at the ranch where we take people through. We'll show them, if it's the fall, we'll show them our piles of seed. We'll show them plants that we're doing or where we're getting ready to burn or something like that. We also do, for most of the past years, we've done a public burn, usually in January, where one of the fields is pretty safe for people to stand up by the cemetery, park their cars where it's safe and watch us do the burn. We burn half the field, and then we let people help us with the other half of the field if they want to burn. And if there's any problems, the cemetery is right there, so it's very handy. But we do, no, so you can, but if you want, get on our mailing list and you'll get an invitation to the burn or to some of the workshops. We may start having some workshops again, doing things, walking around a ranch in the open air, staying 10 or 20 feet apart is getting a little bit more like, we just got to get back out there. So we may do some later this fall. Get on our mailing list.
That all sounds really great. Field trip sounds awesome. Your techniques and your materials were very interesting. And I like that you're using some repurposing some things to use in your work. It's awesome. So we have a question from Alex, and Alex is asking, do certain species need to be started in seed flats versus on open ground?
Well, if they couldn't be started on open ground, they'd be extinct, right? That's my theory. I'm not a great horticulturist. So if I can, I prefer to just get the seeds out there. That said, I have found that the green eyes and the silphium, where I only have a little bit of seed, do very well in pots in the nursery, and then we can plant them out. So, but we're assuming, and that's one of the reasons that we're trying some of these in exposure so that we can put seed out and eliminate some of the variables like deer, so that, and we'll do matched pairs. We'll take different seeds. We take our woody plants, we get 20 species and we'll put them in rows about 1 foot apart, and we'll do 17 rows with the 17 species. And we'll do that inside the exclosure under a cedar tree. And then we do it outside the exclosure. And then we can tell if we have them inside the exclosure and outside, then we know it's probably the deer that are eating them. It's not just our bad techniques. But some plants we've had very little success from, but we've learned to put them out early. We're putting our woody seed out in February. We started switching to putting it out in December, and we're maybe doubling the number of plants that we get up. So we're learning, but because what we're trying to model is not how to do a backyard garden. We want to learn how to deal with acres and acres and acres and acres. And if you're going to do that, you don't have enough money to plant 5,000 evergreen sumacs and put cages around them all. You have to solve it in a bigger scale way. And so if I can harvest 60,000 seeds of evergreen sumac in 1 hour, 2 hours, and throw that out. And a few years later, I've got 5 evergreen sumacs. I'm doing much better than if I grew them in a nursery, put them out there, watered them, put them in cages, protected them, and a year later I have 5 evergreen sumacs out of 10, but I just spent like 500 hours to keep them alive. So we're trying to model ways to do this on a large scale. Not that our planet is in such bad shape that people really need to do large scale repair of the earth, but just in case that happens, we want to be ready.
I'm glad that there are landowners that are doing this with their land, and there are people like you that know, what to think about and how to work with the land and figure things out, depending on, because all sites are different. So we have another, there's a group of questions from Rebecca, so I'm just going to read through them all together. So after seeds are harvested, how long do they last? Can you plant them over a 3 to 4 year period? Also, it seems that your success not only depends on keeping the deer away, but making sure that sufficient water is available. With that in mind, have you considered planting seedlings instead of seed?
Very little, because like I say, planting seedlings is very, very labor intense. And when, especially, we have 1,200 acres. So that's, and we have a couple hundred species that basically there's hardly any of them that we want a lot of. So we're focusing on seed. Also, we are trying not to, we have some faith that what happens in the wild is a seed is formed, it falls to the ground, or some animal eats it and eliminates it 20 feet away, or something, and it comes up, and these plants have been doing that for thousands of years. And so there's some possibility of that working for us, and that we see that the least costly intervention that we could make probably is as dispersers. In other words, I can go to a couple bushes on a roadside of evergreen sumacs and get the 50,000, 60,000 seeds and scatter them through 2 cedar breaks that are each 15 acres each. And I can get those seeds scattered. It might take them like 1,000 years to creep a teeny ways from the highway and back into someplace like that. So human beings as dispersers is a very lofty thought, and maybe practical in dollars and cents time, because we are getting paid to do this by the landowner, but we have to, we don't have an unlimited budget. So this is not rocket science. It's more than rocket science, but it's not rocket science budget either. We just have to get real and do the best we can. So and how long the seed lasts? Well, the other thing is we're trying to mimic natural conditions. So what happened to a bluebonnet this spring is the seed ripened, it fell to the ground, every single bluebonnet plant in Texas died. Now, how's that for an act of faith? They all died, and there's seed on the ground, and it's out in these sunny areas, and it's in Texas, and the temperature is 110 or maybe 120 at the ground, and lo and behold, next year some bluebonnets come up. All right, so as much as we can without getting into sophisticated dormancy or testing for dormancy or breaking dormancy with acids, which we might do if we were a nursery trying to get like 100% or 95% seed fill on our flats, we are assuming that there are some processes, and even if we get a much lower percentage, that there's some way to take that seed and throw it out there and mimicking natural conditions. So natural conditions means getting it out as soon as we can, and keeping it in natural temperatures. So I keep my seed outside where it's not getting rained on, but where it's getting cold this winter and where it's warming up this summer. Now, if I was a seed company, I would have a temperature and moisture controlled storage area. And I would be following all the research that shows that if you hold the seed at, I don't know, 40 to 45, 50 degrees, not too cold, and if you keep it a certain humidity, that seed will last a lot longer. And that's absolutely correct, but we're not a seed business. We're not trying to maximize the volume of seed. We are trying to maximize the number of plants we can get to come out under a bush. And so it's a slightly different criteria. So the more we can harvest the seed, not keep it very long, don't put it in the trunk of your car where it's going to cook to 130 degrees, keep it in natural temperatures and get it out on the ground as soon as possible, you're getting closer to what the seed does by itself. So in lieu of doing hundreds of years of research on each individual species, we figure that's going to cover some of our bases.
Thank you. So we've got quite a few questions that have come into the chat. The next one is from Patsy, and she's wondering where she can find advice on how to plant seeds for various species. And in particular, she's interested in American basket flower, and she wanted to just add the best ways to plant seeds for various species. Do you know of any resources where that information?
What was that flower that you said? I didn't catch that.
American basket flower.
Oh, basket flower. Basket flower is very easy to harvest because all the seeds ripen at once. Each of those little baskets has 20 or 30 seeds. They're big, they're black, they're size of a small BB. And they stay on the top of the plant for a month or two. So you can kind of be late and still get a lot. You may even still be able to find some. And so they're very easy to harvest. And they're an annual, so they have a lot of seed and they have some successes. We've thrown them out, and sure enough, you get some. If you throw them out in a really tight turf, they're an annual. Okay, so annuals like bare soil. Annuals get pushed out by perennials. And from a restorationist point of view or a gardener's point of view, they're going to get pushed out by either perennials you like Silphium or Engelmann daisies or penstemon, or perennials you don't like Johnson grass or bastard cabbage or something like that, right? So, so you won't get basket flower if you throw them into a field that's tight with perennials. There's no room for them. But a disturbed site is ideal, just like bluebonnets. You try throwing bluebonnets out on a St. Augustine lawn and see how many you get. Zero, nada, none. There's no bare space for them. So a basket flower is like that. But disturbed areas, you know what used to make disturbed areas where they're native? Oh, those buffalo. They used to roll around and stomp on things and whatever. So get yourself a few buffalo and then plant your basket flower.
Okay, so we have a question from Fred, and he's wondering, is there much danger around Austin that controlled fires will get out of control?
If it's a controlled fire, it's not out of control. But I say that because people give me a hard time. I'm old school, and I will use the word controlled burn. And none of the new people they say, oh, don't say that, that's wrong. Controlled burn, there's no such thing as a controlled burn. It's a prescribed fire, right? It's a management burn. Don't use the word control because it can get out of control. Yes, it can. And so you have to be very careful. Don't do it on a whim. Only people that have experience and have learned that experience from other people or taken the courses and are doing it with experience and using utmost caution should be doing it. On the other hand, if you do it well and you don't let it get out of control and it is a good management fire, it means that that piece of land will be much less susceptible to out of control burns than it would be if you had managed it. If you've been paying any attention to what's happening in California, one of the reasons that there's so much flammable material is because the natural and the indigenous people set burns that would keep those habitats with less brush underneath, less dead wood, because there'd be frequent small fires, haven't had the frequent small fires, so that when you get a fire, there's much more to burn. And then of course you add in human-caused global warming and you have the perfect storm. So that said, there's always a risk to management fires, but what you're gambling on is that you're taking that risk, you're doing it carefully, you're doing it well, and then your area is less susceptible to cataclysmic fires. So that's the payoff if you do it right.
Thank you. So we're still getting questions coming in. I don't know, we might be going for a long time.
Well, I go for a while because I'll tell you what, see, if I was in an auditorium with you all and somebody wanted to leave, they kind of stew because they feel embarrassed to get up and they won't want to embarrass me or them. And they sit there and they'd start to fall asleep and I'd see them nodding off. But there could be 3 people sleeping right now and we wouldn't know it. And
I know, and we've
they
got
could
people
all
that,
leave and we won't know it and we won't be offended. So I'm open for a little while. I can't stay forever.
okay, we'll keep going. So Rachel wants to know, are there laws regulating places where seed may be collected? And also, she's wondering if you have any live stream events of the ranch.
The laws, well, there's private property laws. So private property, you need permission. Almost any state park, national park, you'll see signs, no pets, don't pick the wildflowers, no collecting firewood, no dogs, no, so it's basically not allowed in almost any public lands unless you're part of a team that's working with those people to collect the seed for them. And, you're part of an organized something that has permission. So always have permission if you're on private land, and you probably can't get permission on public land unless you are somehow publicly connected with a public purpose. But, there used to be rumors that you could get arrested for picking bluebonnets. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but what the law really said, there is a law, a Texas law that apparently says something like, you are not allowed to damage the public right of way. And so you could get arrested on the side of the road, and you probably would get arrested, like if you had a shovel and you were digging up all the cherry trees that the highway department planted along, I-35 or something like that. You're damaging the highway department. They get really mad and they probably fine you. I have never heard anybody get arrested for damaging the public right of way because they picked a bluebonnet, or even worse, they sat on it with 3 grandchildren. But so there is a law, but you pay your money, it takes your choice. I don't know of anybody that's been respectful and careful that's got in trouble. I mean, when I'm on the side of the road looking at something or taking pictures or something, sometimes I get stopped because my vehicles tend to be a little bit beat up, and sometimes I have pickup trucks. And you know what they want to know? They'll say, "Hey, buddy, are you picking flowers?" No, they say, did you just dump that trash? So, don't dump trash, or don't go picking flowers when you got a lot of trash in the back of your truck, and they'll think that you're just pretending to pick flowers because you're going to dump the trash as soon as they leave.
Okay, and just a lot of people are surprised to find in San Antonio, there is, in certain places, including the Riverwalk, there is an ordinance that prohibits damage and destruction and removal of the plants and damage to the plants. So that includes the mission reach, and we do try to make sure people are aware of that. And we do work with, as you mentioned, some of the partners and things as far as collecting seed, but it is actually against ordinance to disturb the vegetation and take the vegetation from the Riverwalk areas.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. All the state parks have that regulation. Most county parks, I mean, every county already had different regulations, and the national parks have that also. Now, when you get into national forests, which we don't have any except in East Texas, there are certain things allowed, like certain harvest of firewood and things like that. And so if you do happen to be in East Texas and have some national forests, you should ask those people a little bit more closely, because those rules will be maybe a little bit more lenient than what's definitely forbidden in national parks.
Okay, we have a question from Billy. And Billy asks, is moringa considered a native plant? Is it advisable to plant it in San Antonio? Moringa.
I have no idea what it is.
I'm not sure. So it's spelled Moringa. I'm not familiar with it.
I've heard that name, but I don't know what it is.
It's not a species that there were a couple of species that you mentioned that I didn't know that I wrote down, and that's not one of them. So I'm not sure what that one is either. We have a question from Wanda. Where can I get info on harvesting common backyard plants like Texas mountain laurel, Pride of Barbados, Texas milkweed, obedient plants, etc.? She's interested in information on harvesting common backyard plants. Do you know of any resources?
Well, most of the ones that she mentioned are woody species. The harvesting them is pretty easy. You know how to pick an apple or pick a cherry or pick a dewberry? That's kind of the way you harvest a Mexican plum or a lantana or something. You just go get the fruits. But there is a book that talks a little bit about harvesting, but it's more about propagation, and that's Jill Noakes. Jill Noakes, it's how to grow the woody plants of Texas. If you just look up Jill Noakes, N-O-K-E-S, and so there's a page or two. It's all about woody plants, but there's quite a bit about seed in there. She'll say, but she's written it mostly for nursery people, so you don't have to do everything she says. But she'll say, get the Mexican plum fruit and let them dry, and then you can screen them to do this. But if you want really high production, this nursery people says you should do some, put it in the refrigerator for 2 months and then take it out a week or two before you want to plant it. So it's all about propagation of woody plants. And so that's a really good book to start with. And it'll give you a few clues about harvesting, but not the kind of practical things like take one of those buckets and attach it to your belt and wear gloves and that kind of stuff, but more like what you're going to do with it. Moringa plant. Jacob, my assistant, has just showed me a moringa plant. And
I think somebody,
no Latin name, but it looks like some exotic.
a couple of people have commented that it's native to the Americas south of here. There's a couple of comments on here, but unfortunately, I think we are actually out of time. We probably need to wrap up. It's about 8:30. And
Sure.
there are some questions that we didn't get to. David, is it okay if we ask the individuals that put these questions that we weren't able to answer, or if there are other people that have others, can they contact you directly at the email that's on the slide right now? And
sure, I'll answer somewhat. I can do some of that. I'll give it a try.
otherwise, I think we'll be here for another hour.
Well, I might have to give shorter answers when I'm typing than when I'm just shooting off my mouth. But I'll maybe give you a little help on that. So yeah,
Well,
you got my
yes,
email there, so send me some questions.
thank you so much, and thanks to everybody for sending the questions. Sorry we couldn't get to them all. This was a great conversation and really great information, David. Thank you so much. There is one comment. Somebody tried to go to your website to get the palatability list, and they got an error page. So they're wondering if maybe the website. Yeah,
We will check that tomorrow
okay.
and see if we can make sure that. So if you have trouble, give us a couple days and try again in a few days.
Okay, that's great, because that information is really excellent information. I'm so glad you're continuously working on it and updating it. And one thing we did want to try again, you all, if anybody's interested, since we don't get to see each other face to face anymore, if you would like to turn your cameras on before we shut down the meeting, please go ahead and do it. And so you can wave or say hi to people or see people you haven't seen. If you don't want to, you don't have to. It's totally up to you. I see a few people getting on just to wave, and thanks so much for coming and joining us, you guys.
Get tea.
Thanks a lot. Nice to see you all.
Thank you. It was great. There, you wave.
Where are we?
There's Lee. Right there. You're there.
There.
Thank you for the presentation.
See you on Saturday.
Nice.
Thank you, Lee.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. It was
So,
awesome.
thank you.
Jerry, you need to tilt your camera so we can see you. I just see, there you go.
Okay, I'm gonna leave.
Okay, I think we're about down to 25 people right now, so I'm going to go ahead and end the meeting. But thank you all for coming. It was great to have such a great talk, and we'll see you next month, if not before. So see you all later. Bye-bye. Have a good
Bye-bye.
night.
Thank you, guys.
Yep.